Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, Krebs is hit with an amazing denial of service attack and then is kicked off of Akamai. We'll tell you about the record-breaking details. And then Firefox puts its foot down and picking NFS or Samba for your network. Then it's a great batch of your questions, our answers, a packed roundup, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 286 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on September 29th, 2016. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, DigitalOcean, Ting, and IX Systems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Oh, the Jupiter Broadcasting downloads, live streams, and all that business. Well, that's brought to you by Scale Engine. Go check that out at scaleengine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hello, Alan.
Hello, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hello, Alan. Welcome back from your travels and whatnot.
Yes.
And no con crud, you're really kind of getting that down. You haven't gotten sick for a while now in the travels. Hats off.
I got sick in Tokyo.
Did you? That's a hard
mostly, one. It was on the last day, but that's when I had to give a talk. Luckily, I got saved by the Japanese VC3000.
Is that like some sort of like vitamin pack, or is that
it's like these 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C in a lozenge.
Oh, that sounds intense. So how was everything? Did everything go great?
Everything went very well, yes.
Good.
My trip home was a bit longer than expected, but...
Oh, really?
Yes. So I flew from Serbia to England, which is like a 2-hour flight, and got there at like 12:30 to find out that my flight home, which was supposed to be at 6 o'clock, had been delayed a couple of hours.
Oh.
It's like, okay. And, you know, there's a flight earlier at 3 o'clock that we could rebook you on, but all the good seats are taken.
And did you have your laptop with you so you could
Yes.
get... Okay.
And I had lounge access, so I was like, you know what? I'll just wait a little bit longer. Because so many people have rebooked, it means I'll probably get upgraded to business class anyway. And I was like, that would be awesome, right? So I'm like, okay, I'll just, go to the lounge. So I, finished getting across, from Terminal 4 to Terminal 2, which is quite a trip at Heathrow.
Yeah.
And then you go through security, and then you go under the runway and down 1,000 miles away to the other part of the airport.
Yeah. Did you walk that whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, from Terminal 4 to Terminal 2, there's a bus.
Okay.
But once you go through security, walking to the actual gates is a long, long way. Anyway. So I go and finally get there, and, I got my $10 meal voucher and spent that on chocolate bars.
Good. Yeah, that's the perfect fuel for that kind of stuff.
I was going to have free food in the lounge. So what I wanted was a bunch of British chocolate bars where we don't have this kind in Canada. So I bought a bunch of those to bring home with me.
The double-decker there?
Yeah.
Nice.
Don't have that in Canada. So I bought a bunch to bring home with me to spend my $10 meal voucher. 'Cause in the lounge, they had free food all day, right? And better than mostly what you could buy at the restaurants.
And so were you able to eat and have connectivity? Were you able to that's nice.
Better Wi-Fi, comfortable chair.
Yeah.
I had a shower.
Oh.
And I got to eat.
That's kind of nice in a sense, because then when you get home, you've checked a couple of things off your to-do list already.
Yes. I wrote an entire disk emulation module thing for FreeBSD while I was there.
Yeah, there you go. Now that's checked off the list.
No, it wasn't 10 Canadian pesos. It was actually 10 British pounds, which is like $15 American.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Although it's always $10 in the local currency, which I think, I guess in a couple places it would be slightly different, but like it would be $10 in Canada, it'd be 10 US dollars in the US, it's 10 pounds in Britain, and probably 10 euros in Europe. It would have to be a lot more than that in Serbia, because a 10 is like a penny there. But anyway.
And so you probably walked away with a lot of great experiences and some stories for BSD Now and whatnot?
Yeah. So anyway, instead of landing at 8 p.m., I landed at 2 a.m. After the comedy of errors that happened with the flight.
Wow.
So the airplane was broken, so they're like, all right, we'll just use the one that's going to be on the way from Toronto soon, and you'll just be a couple hours late. It'll be fine.
Okay.
Then that plane was 2 hours late taking off. So they bumped us back 2 more hours. And then because of that, turned out that at this point, the pilots that they had to fly us who had been set up, had showed up at the airport ready to go at like 6 o'clock. Well, at midnight, they extended, they were past the limit of how many hours they can be awake and still fly.
Oh.
Right? They hadn't had enough sleep.
Yeah.
So they had to get a different air crew.
And then you have to wait for the relief crew to come in. And, I've been there.
And then they had to clean the airplane because it had been used previously and get it all sorted out. And then the new airplane was slightly different configuration than the other one, the original one. So that anybody in rows like 20 to 24 had to have their seats changed around and so on, and a bunch of other things.
Yeah,
I got the upgraded business class. So
I remember my last flight home not too long ago. They had to bring in a relief crew, and then the relief crew got stuck in LA traffic, and we almost didn't make the connecting flight in Oregon, and it was very stressful. So the fact that you got to go take a shower, get some work done, cash in a voucher, that sounds kind of nice. And while you were off having a good old time, the internet was freaking out about this record DDoS on Krebs. And I bet a lot of our audience is kind of familiar with maybe like the bold, highlighted, big elements of the story, but I bet there's a lot of details in this son of a gun that are pretty fascinating. You want to start there?
Yeah. And because it ended up being the topic of the keynote at the end of the conference I was at, I kind of thought it'd be a good story to talk about. Yeah, no kidding. I'd been thinking about it a lot in the last week. So yes, on last Tuesday evening, KrebsOnSecurity.com was the target of an extremely large and unusual distributed denial of service attack designed to knock the site offline. The attack did not succeed thanks to the hard work of the engineers at Akamai Prolexic, which is a denial of service mitigation company, the company that protects Krebs' site from such digital sieges. But according to Akamai, it was nearly double the size of the largest attack they'd seen previously, and was among some of the biggest attacks that the internet had ever seen.
So this is, Akamai is... That's a huge statement for them to say this is the largest attack they've ever seen.
Well, it's double the size of the largest one they've ever dealt with before.
That is huge, right? That seems historical.
Yes. Now, so some other people have seen big ones about this size, but this was right up there with the biggest ones ever. They say the attack began around 8 p.m. on September 20th. The initial reports were that it was approximately 665 gigabits per second. Additional analysis of the traffic suggests the number was actually closer to about 620. But in any case, this is many orders of magnitude more traffic than is typically needed to knock most sites offline. You can knock most sites offline with 1 or 2 gigabits probably, if they require that, depending on the site.
Yeah.
Martin McKay, who's Akamai's senior security advocate, said the largest attack the company had previously clocked was earlier this year at 363 gigabits. But he said that there was a major difference between last night's denial of service attack and the previous attack record holder. The 363 gigabit attack is thought to have been generated by a botnet compromising systems using well-known techniques which allow them to amplify a relatively small attack into a larger one. So almost all of the previous large-scale denial of service attacks that we've seen were using reflection and amplification attacks. So what that is, because of the way UDP works, you're not actually making a connection. You're just sending a packet and hoping the person gets it. So it means if you set your IP address wrong in that packet, it looks like it came from someone else. This doesn't work in TCP because you send the first packet, and the other side gets it and sends back a reply that you have to reply to actually open the connection. And obviously, if you fake your IP address, you don't get the second stage of the three-way handshake.
But in UDP, it's not checked?
Right. Because it makes it faster because you're just saying, hey, give me this information, get it back.
So if somebody's getting slammed by a bunch of UDP packets and they look at the source address, you're saying that really just can't be trusted?
Entirely. A lot of times it can't be. So, but that's just a regular UDP attack.
Yeah.
In a reflection attack, what you do is you go to the DNS server, and so I send a fake packet to a DNS server saying, what's the IP address of Google? But I set the from address to your IP address. So now the DNS server is replying to you.
Right.
So now instead of my IP address showing up as attacking you, it's now this DNS server that looks like it's attacking you. So that's reflection. But then there's amplification. If the packet I send to the DNS server is very small, it just says, what's the IP address of this domain name? But the answer is really big because I've set up that domain name to have like 50 IP addresses to make a really big packet. Now, I send a small packet to the DNS server, and it sends a much bigger one to you.
And this DNS server probably has incredible connectivity, I would imagine, depending on the DNS server.
And I'm using every DNS server in the world.
Right.
That every one that I can get at.
Yeah.
And so, because, like Google has the DNS servers 8.8.8.8 and 8.8.4.4, but they're anycast. They're actually made up of hundreds of DNS servers all over the globe. So I can just pound on all of them, and that will mean all of those will now be sending bigger packets to you. So it allows me to amplify the attack.
Right.
I only have to I don't need that much internet connection on my end. I can just send a bunch of small packets and cause these amplifiers to send bigger packets.
It's brilliant.
The same thing was happening with NTP, where the public NTP servers, you could say, hey, give me a list of all the people that are getting their time from you. And the NTP server would oblige and send you a giant list. And so I'd send you a small request and it would, attack somebody with this very large attack. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's really taking advantage of the architecture of the underlying protocols in a way that's extremely clever and leveraging other people's infrastructure.
Well, in particular, just it's things that we didn't think of when we designed these protocols.
Yes,
and
right.
They're protocols that we can't really change now.
Yeah, they're kind of in.
For DNS, we've mitigated this mostly by doing request rate limiting, where each DNS server will only reply to 50 requests a second or something from any one IP address.
Sure.
So that, basically it limits it so it can't denial service attack you. And NTP servers have all been locked down, so they won't answer the questions that you don't need answered this way. Or we'll send a small response saying, hey, if you want the answer to that, you're going to have to switch to TCP and prove you're really you. And so anyway, all the previous really large attacks were using these reflection and amplification techniques. And that's how they managed to get so big, because their botnet wasn't big enough. But by having the whole botnet using all these reflectors and amplifiers, they were able to make a bigger attack.
Sure.
So basically your bot sends spoof packets of a few bytes, and the reflector then sends a response that's 2 or 3 or 10 or 15 times bigger, and that makes your attack bigger. And the interesting there is that not only does that attack obviously harm the victim who's getting all these packets, but it really hurts the reflectors as well. It was really interesting to see this when they were targeting the NTP stuff built into switches and routers and servers, like in the IPMI interface, or the ILO or DRAC interface built into a Dell server. And using that to attack. So it's in the actual operating system, you don't even see anything.
Yeah, it's happening.
You're actually talking to an embedded Linux running in a different chip.
Yes, right.
Inside the server that you don't even know
about
necessarily.
That's so brilliant, because a lot of times the systems that have that type of hardware are also in a data center with great connectivity and great CPU, or great, if nothing else, a large pipe out to the rest of the internet. And so that's why it's such a great machine type of hardware to go after, because that's usually what comes along with a machine that has a DRAC or something like that.
Yes. So thanks to the hard work of many sysadmins and advocates of this particular thing, I think the Shadow server and a couple other places were basically tracking these down and sending the abuse emails to get these fixed up. Now most DNS and NTP servers are much more locked down, and the reflection attacks are less common, although there are still lots of other protocols that are vulnerable to amplification like this and aren't easy to fix. So we definitely haven't seen the end of reflection, but we've probably stemmed the tide a bit there. What was interesting about this attack on Krebs is it didn't use those.
Oh.
It was a vanilla straight up flood.
Really?
Yeah.
And they didn't. So why I'm surprised by that is because of the volume the attack was. It seems like it would have to come from either.
Before that, nobody thought that they could get that big without using reflection.
Yeah, because you would need the speed and you would need the connectivity of those systems. Or you would just need an insane number of machines, right? I mean, that's the two ways to do it, right?
Yeah. So they say, in contrast, the huge assault this week on Krebs' site appears to have been launched almost exclusively by a very large botnet of hacked devices.
Oh.
According to Akamai, none of the attack methods employed on Tuesday night's attack on Krebs relied on amplification or reflection.
Oh.
Rather, many were garbage web attack methods that require a legitimate connection between the attacking host and the target, including just regular GET requests or post floods or just SYN attacks. So all the really classic kind that normally they wouldn't be that effective because you couldn't be big enough. But in this case, they had so many of these hacked devices that they were able to make this huge attack.
Geez, I wonder if this is going to be more of a problem as more just little crap devices get internet connections.
Yes. There are some indications that this attack was launched with the help of a botnet that enslaved a large number of hacked so-called Internet of Things devices.
Yeah, there you go.
Including routers, IP cameras, and digital video recorders, DVRs.
Oh,
We
yeah.
talked previously about, what was it, like 150 brands of CCTV DVRs for security systems were all the same Chinese firmware that had a whole bunch of bugs in it that weren't going to be fixed.
And it's been pointed out to me kind of recently that a lot of these DVRs are connected to the internet because they're managed by a security company that's like it's part of the alarm.
Well, there's those DVRs, but this one also seems to involve the regular cable DVRs, like the ones you record TV shows on your TV.
Oh, what?
Right?
No.
They have access to stuff.
And a lot of them have
almost all of those now have internet connections, so you can watch Netflix on them.
Or so you can download TV Guide information over the internet connection or do your video on demand or whatever. Yeah. But
mostly to become a set-top box. So imagine you have this box that you've got an Ethernet connection into for your TV so you can stream Netflix without using up your wireless, right? Or whatever. And those being part of the attack.
Wow.
Or even, think about it, the smart TVs. Especially the older generations of them. Like my parents have an early Samsung Smart TV, and I've got the Ethernet cable plugged directly into it so that, that it doesn't stutter when they're streaming stuff.
We've got a Vizio here that has some whole platform on it that even sometimes occasionally opens up its own Wi-Fi access point. It's unbelievable.
They say that a lot of these devices are exposed to the internet and protected with weak or hard-coded passwords.
Yeah.
So Krebs says that he'll address some of the challenges of minimizing the threat of these large-scale denial of service attacks in a future post. But for now, it says it seems like we can expect such monster attacks as to soon become the norm. He says many readers have been asking whether this attack was in retaliation for the recent series of takedowns on the denial of service for higher service VDoS that we talked about last week and the week before. Which coincided with the arrest of two young men named in his original report as the founders of the service. Krebs says, I can't say for sure, but it seems likely to be related. Most of the post-request attack that were done against his site as part of the 650 gigabit attack included the string free Applejack, a reference to the nickname of one of the owners of the VDoS service.
Okay. 620 gigabits.
Yep. That's a big number.
Yeah, I wonder when we'll hit a terabit. I wonder when that
in the next story.
Yo. Okay, there you go. There's a tease, everybody. Boy, that one came up a little faster than I expected, Alan.
So the opening keynote for EuroBSDCon was the next decade of BSD. And, one of the things is, we're going to have to get ready in the next 10 years for terabit network cards.
Yeah.
We have some 100 gigabit cards already, but they're not really normal yet.
Yeah.
But soon everything will have a terabit. And it's like, it turns out we're going to need it just to deal with denial of service attack.
Yeah, seriously, what a kind of unfortunate reality that is. All right, well, so before we get to that story, let's take a moment right here and thank our first sponsor, and that's the great folks at Ting. And why I say great? Well, because it's mobile that makes sense, and I like how they're challenging the entire mobile industry, and you can take part in that by becoming a Ting customer. They just charge for what you use. Your minutes, your messages, your megabytes, they add them all up. That's what you pay. It's $6 for the line, and your usage on top of that. I'm gonna be straight with you guys. If you got a small business, or really even more than 10 lines, up to a lot more than that, Ting can be an unbelievable way to deliver actual usable, fairly flexible overall for business for specifically for businesses wireless service. And here's why, a couple of reasons I say that. First of all, it's really easy to move the SIMs around. So if you move phones around, it's simple to just pop the SIMs out and pop them in. You can set up all of the management stuff on their control panel, which works really well. You can name the devices individually in their control panel, so you could set up flags in case somebody's going over on their messages or their data or whatever you might want to worry about. They have really nice abilities to simply turn off a line when you're done with it. It's just $9 to get a SIM card to activate another device. And because they have CDMA or GSM networks, It's also very nice for data connectivity. Now, just the last couple of days, I was somewhere where my CDMA connectivity was very, very poor, but they had fantastic GSM connectivity, and I have a MiFi that does CDMA, and then I have a separate MiFi that does GSM, and I pull either one I want up. And typically, that would be a ludicrous thing to say. That would be what? What would that be? $60 a month for each one of those things? And because I'm only paying $6 a month, and then just when I use it, it gives me the flexibility to stay connected regardless of what network area I am in. And I like that because it's doable for someone at my scale, and the economy of scale just grows if you just keep adding people onto that. It continues to be extremely reasonable because it's just $6 a line with no contract, no early termination fee, and you only pay for what you use. So get started by going to techsnap.ting.com. That'll give you a $25 service credit, or if you get a device, it'll take $25 off a device if you're a cord cutter. Also, go to techsnap.ting.com and they'll go check out their blog. They've been doing some really nice cord cutting posts on their blog, and they're taking another look at Sling TV. I don't know, maybe about 6 months now. I'm 6 months into Sling TV, and I run it on my NVIDIA Shield, and I have just a data connection. And I am able to watch live news, the Food Network, the History Channel, a couple other, lots of sports stuff that I don't watch. But like when the debates were going on, Sling was one of my go-tos. And I just fire it right up on my television using my Shield TV. And they have a write-up about Sling TV. If you're curious, see if it might be a way for you to cut the cord, but still watch live news and sports events. Start by going to techsnap.ting.com. Go check out the Ting service, and also check out their blog. Maybe get a few cord cutting tips. techsnap.ting.com. Okay, I'll admit, you've definitely got my interest piqued on this next story. So it sounds like this is part two. We're sort of picking back up.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, I titled this one "The Shot Heard Round the World."
Yeah.
And this is a follow-up post. Krebs is discussing the democratization of censorship, which sounds good, but is not. In particular, his point is that you no longer need to be a nation state to censor someone. You just need to have a big enough botnet. In particular, these people were not very pleased with Krebs and were able to take his site offline.
Yes. Yes. And he's got, you know what? He's made some hay from it. I'll give him that. Like when this kind of stuff happens to Krebs, it's a perfect thing for him to write about. So
yeah, but that's not very useful if his website isn't online.
Fair enough. That's very true. So what does he mean by the democratization of censorship? Because that sounds like
basically
anybody can censor.
Anybody can censor people.
That doesn't sound good.
Exactly.
Okay.
He says, allow me to explain how I arrived at this unsettling conclusion. As many of you know, my site was taken offline for the better part of a week. This outage came in the wake of the historically large distributed denial of service attack, which hurled so much junk traffic at KrebsOnSecurity.com that the denial of service mitigation provider, Akamai Prolexic, chose to unmoor my site from its protective harbor. So basically,
Whoa.
Akamai kicked him off their service.
Wow.
He says, let me be clear, I do not fault Akamai for their decision. I was a pro bono customer from the start, and Akamai and its sister company Prolexic have stood by me through countless attacks over the last 4 years.
Oh, okay.
It just so happens that this last siege was nearly twice the size of the next largest attack that they had ever seen. Once it became evident that the assault was beginning to cause problems for the company's paying customers, they explained that the choice to let my site go was a business decision, pure and simple. So while Krebs understands their position there, this poses a big problem. The bad guys now know the magic number, 650 megabits, at which point denial of service mitigation services will tell you to piss off. That you're on your own. Sorry, we can't protect you. And that, kind of breaks the internet in this way, right? It's like, so you can't even pay to be immune to this anymore. They will just be like, no. Normally you have your ISP, and you have your site there.
Right.
You get denial of service attack, and the site, your ISP shuts you down and saying, sorry, you're affecting our other customers. We can't do this. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to go to Akamai and have them protect me from this. But now the attack is so big that even Akamai is turning you away. He says, nevertheless, Akamai rather abruptly informed me that I had until 6 p.m. that very same day, roughly 2 hours later, to make arrangements for migrating off their network. His main concern, or Krebs' main concern at the time, was making sure his current hosting provider wasn't going to bear the brunt of the attack when the shields fell. To ensure this absolutely would not happen, Krebs asked Akamai to redirect his site to 127.0.0.1, effectively relegating all traffic destined for Krebs on security into a giant black hole. And he goes on to describe that process. But it says, today, I am happy to report the site is back up, this time under Project Shield, a free program run by Google to protect journalists from online censorship. And make no mistake, denial of service attack, particularly those the size of the assault that hit my site this week, are uniquely effective weapons for stomping on free speech for reasons I'll explore.
I do think that's what DDoS attacks are probably the most used for, is a a lazy, pathetic way to stifle the speech of the site. It's so they feel so juvenile. And as somebody who's been the source, or not the source, the destination, the target, of DDoS attacks, it just always feels so petty. Like, really, that's the best you could do? Okay.
You don't have anything better to do?
Yeah, exactly.
But this raises another question. What happens when the bad guys find the magic number to perform a large enough attack to disrupt Google?
Well,
it's almost like the challenge has been issued to all of the botnets of the world.
Is that possible?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, especially I guess if you could make the software crash, or you could confuse the software.
Well, not just that, but even Google only has so much network capacity.
Yeah, they have a lot though.
Sure, they have a lot, but do they actually have more than some other people?
Well, my understanding about Google is one of the most aggressive things they did very early on is they bought up a lot of fiber connections, so they own the connections between their data centers.
But those fibers have a speed limit.
Yeah, and routers can get overloaded, and when you start, and we've also seen we've seen how if you take out an area of the Google network, it can actually impact other areas of the Google network too. So you never really know where there could be a vulnerability, a soft spot where you poke that and it's all of a sudden a house of cards. But how can Google afford to do something like this? That's what makes me think they have so much infrastructure they can afford to do this.
But at some point the traffic is coming from other ISPs, and sometimes that costs money.
Yeah.
Now, for PR reasons and so on, Google's willing to spend quite a bit of money to keep hosting these journalists because it's part of their mission or whatever. But, there is some magic number at which Google will yield, I think. And I'm hoping we don't find out what that is, because then at that point, what are we going to do? What options are left? Right?
Yeah, I don't know.
This was actually the topic of the closing keynote at EuroBSDCon last weekend.
Fascinating.
Sadly, there's no video recording of that because it didn't work out. It raised some pretty scary questions, actually. And I will talk about that a little bit more as we keep going here.
Okay.
But Krebs says, why do I speak of denial of service attacks as a form of censorship? Quite simply because the economics of mitigating large-scale denial of service attacks do not bode well for protecting individual users, say nothing of independent journalists like Krebs. Interview with the Boston Globe, the Akamai executives said the attack, if sustained, likely would have cost the company millions of dollars. In the hours and days following the site going offline, I spoke with multiple DDoS mitigation firms. One offered to host Krebs on security for 2 weeks at no charge, but after that, they said the same kind of protection that Krebs had under Akamai would cost between $150,000 and $200,000 per year.
Oh, that's not sustainable.
And then Krebs goes on to talk about some of the other issues with that, and just musing about starting a charity and Kickstarter and so on to try to raise money to basically set up something like this that is protected and at those kind of rates, and then offer the hosting to a bunch of different people who are basically endangered in that same way, and try to deal with it. But that's just amusing at this point. Then he also points to a recent post by Bruce Schneier, saying earlier this month, noted cryptologist and security blogger Bruce Schneier penned an unusually alarmist column titled "Someone is Learning How to Take Down the Internet." The link is in the show notes.
I remember that.
Citing unnamed sources, Schneier warned that there was strong evidence indicating that nation-state actors were actively and aggressively probing the internet for weak spots that could allow them to bring the entire web to a virtual standstill. Someone is extensively testing the core defensive capabilities of the companies that provide critical internet services. Who would do this? It doesn't seem like something an activist, criminal, or researcher would do. Profiling core infrastructure is common practice in espionage and intelligence gathering. It's not normal for companies to do that. He says, furthermore, the size and scale of these probes, and especially their persistence, points to state actors. It feels like a nation's military cyber command trying to calibrate its weaponry in the case of cyber war. It reminds me of the U.S. Cold War program of flying high-altitude planes over the Soviet Union to force their air defense systems to turn on so that their capabilities could be mapped. So he says, what exactly was it that generated the 650 gigabit attack against Krebs' site? Was it a space-based weapon of mass destruction built by and tested by a rogue nation-state or an arch-villain like Spectre from the James Bond series of novels? If only the enemy were that black and white. He says, no, as I reported in the last blog post before my site was unplugged, the enemy in this case was far less sexy. There's every indication that the attack was launched with the help of a botnet that has enslaved a large number of hacked so-called Internet of Things devices, mainly routers, IP cameras, CCTV systems, and digital video recorders that are exposed to the Internet and protected with weak or hard-coded passwords. Most of these devices are available for sale at retail stores for less than $100, or in the case of the routers and some DVRs, are actually shipped by ISPs to their customers. Right? Like a lot of people's DVR comes with their cable subscription, and a lot of routers now do as well. And so when users don't even have a choice of which one they're using, it really raises the question, well, who's responsible for the security of that router? Right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. And is there some sort of like expiration date that they should put on there, like you do food that you buy at the grocery store? No updates, no longer after this date.
Well, the biggest problem is that most of these don't get any updates ever.
Yeah. Or
Right?
users have no idea they need to be updated too.
Mm-hmm. Some readers on Twitter have asked why the attackers would have burned so many compromised systems with such an overwhelming force against Krebs' little site. Right? They probably didn't need 650 gigabits to knock Krebs' site offline. Mm-hmm. After all the reasons, the attackers showed their hand in this assault, exposing the internet addresses of a huge number of compromised devices that might otherwise be used for actual money-making cybercriminal activities, such as hosting malware or relaying spam. Surely network providers would take that list of hacked devices and begin blocking them from launching attacks going forward. It's like, while we'd like to think that the hacked devices will be secured after this because we've figured out where they all are, the reality is that they probably won't be. Akamai probably didn't record every single IP address of all the people that were attacking them. At some point, they just had to route the traffic into the black hole and not look at it. Even if there was a firmware update to fix these devices that were being hacked, how often do people update the firmware on their IP cameras or their DVR?
Yeah.
Or even know that there is such a thing or how to do it?
Yeah.
In some cases, the cable companies might be able to help push firmwares to routers and DVRs.
Yeah, maybe they do like behind the scenes if you're lucky. Right. But to routers, I almost kind of doubt it because the risk and the support cost of knocking people offline seems like it'd be too prohibitive. We wouldn't do it.
And the cable companies do have some incentive to do this now because those attacks are using up their bandwidth and costing them money.
Yes.
Whereas outside of that, a lot of times they don't have any incentive. When the attacks were smaller, when the amount coming from each device was small enough before, there wasn't really any incentive for them to try to fix it. And the biggest thing is that, a lot of the Krebs in the article talks about, BCP38 and ISPs trying to block spoofed packets. It's like, while that is great, and we kind of want to do that, there are a couple problems with it, but we want to do it. The bigger problem is that these guys weren't using reflection or spoofing at all. It was just a straight up attack. And so even if we got all that done, it wouldn't help in this case. And then the other thing is that in the end, even if ISPs notified their customers that they were part of this attack, right? If everybody who had one of these compromised devices got a letter in the mail from their ISP saying, something in your house was used, it's like, well, everybody's behind NAT, right? So it's like, how do you tell which of your Internet of Things device was used in the attack? If you're just a regular person and you don't know how to use a protocol analyzer, or even if you do, if the attack's not happening right now, then how do you know if it was your DVR or your smart TV or your thermostat or your refrigerator that was actually being used to attack Krebs?
Yeah.
Or worse, if it's your router, then you're running your protocol analyzer inside your network and you don't see anything because it was all happening on the outside. But the bigger problem here is even if the ISPs could send a letter to the user's not going to know what to do. And there's really no way to tell which device it was inside the network. And so the chances of this getting fixed very easily are pretty low. Yeah. And if we thought the 650 gigabits was enough to make almost any site kneel to the attacker, OVH.net, the big French ISP, like server hosting company with huge amounts of bandwidth, reports a botnet of almost 150,000 CCTV systems, cameras, and DVR units, each with a network capacity somewhere between 1 and 30 megabits of upload. Started attacking their network and hit a peak of 1.1 terabits per second, or 1,100 gigabits per second.
There it is.
And they estimated the capacity of that botnet to be over 1.5 terabytes. But the whole botnet wasn't being used at that time.
And you tell me this is made up of mostly embedded equipment.
Yeah.
And so,
it's just, everybody's home internet connection has got a couple of megabits of upload now.
Yeah, and
if you just take 150,000, if some of these devices, there are millions of them.
And they've got decent enough ARM processors and decent enough network connections in them. Some of them are probably even gigabit connected now, right?
Mm-hmm. now, most people's, it's mostly rated by rate limited by people's upstream connections, which are usually, even if you have FiOS with like a gigabit of download, you usually only have maybe 20 or 30 megabits of upload. Just enough people with 1 megabit of upload. And all of a sudden, crazy.
Yeah, how are you going to ever... Yeah, geez. This seems like a huge problem that's just going to get worse.
Yeah, and the problem is we would have had to solve this 3 years ago.
Yeah.
By when these devices were created.
So what I want to do is I want to put everything on the network.
Even if every new device that was released after today wasn't vulnerable to anything somehow, which just isn't possible, we would still have this problem going forward for the next how many years. But yeah, 1.5 terabits per second. That's a lot.
Yeah, it is. Holy smokes.
So yeah, Krebs says, I don't know what it will take to wake the larger internet community out of its slumber to address this growing threat to free speech and e-commerce. My guess is it will take an attack that endangers human lives, shuts down critical national infrastructure, or disrupts national elections. The sad truth these days is that it's a lot easier to censor the digital media on the internet than it is to censor the printed books and newspapers in the physical world. On the internet, anyone with an axe to grind and a willingness to learn a bit about technology can become an instant self-appointed global censor. It's kind of interesting because the internet was democratizing stuff by allowing anybody to put information out there without having to own a newspaper. But now it turns out it might be easier to censor those people than it is to censor an actual newspaper if you're not a government.
Yeah.
But, Krebs's kind of ideas of what it will take to actually cause people to wake up to try to solve this were the scary part from the closing keynote of EuroBSDCon, which is, when something like this happens, when there's an attack that shuts down some critical national infrastructure or disrupts an election or something, is the governments are going to get involved, right? And then you see this idea of, some government of a country in Europe decides that they're going to regulate the internet in and out of their country. And eventually we get to this point where the internet is actually broken up on national boundaries. So each country has its own internet. And then they're interconnected, but only, people with a license or whatever are allowed to have connections between the countries. So then almost all the traffic that people actually have going international would have to go over something like Facebook or Google. And really, if you look at the internet now, it is almost that way, right? If you're using Facebook, you're actually talking to a server likely in your country or nearby. And then the message is relayed across Facebook's network to get to the person in the other country. And same with CDNs, right? That's the whole point of a CDN. It's what Scale Engine does. We have these servers in all these different countries so that when you're downloading this episode of TechSNAP, you download it from a server in your country rather than all the way across the internet. But, if the governments get involved and decide to limit who can actually send messages across the global internet and then only allow inside their country where they can actually prosecute people, then the internet changes a lot. And we keep kind of sliding towards this where everybody's, nobody runs their own email anymore. Everybody just uses, Google, Gmail, and so on, right? And we're just getting closer and closer to this. And at some point, somebody in the government is going to figure out that it looks like a solution to this problem. I don't know that it actually is, but
that's interesting. I was
but
doing.
Really, the big point of this was denial of service attacks are getting so big now.
Yeah.
That it's going to put small ISPs out of business because everybody's going to have to host a site with somebody like Akamai that's big enough to absorb these attacks. And, how much worse is the internet now that we have so many fewer ISPs compared to back in the day with dial-up where there was lots of little like mom and pop ISPs and everything was better. We've seen what happens when we concentrate the power of our internet connections down to, 5 ISPs in the US, like, Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, and so on. If we end up doing that with the entire internet, or if you want to host something on the internet, you have to talk to one of these 5 companies because anyone smaller will just get taken out by a denial of service attack.
So it seems like the real issue is below the fact that we have all the Internet of Things connected, we have these cable boxes connected, these DVRs connected. The real issue is, and this is something you and I have talked about before, is we didn't solve the updates and patching problem before we decided to connect everything online. And we just put the cart before the horse, and this is one of the ways we're going to pay for it, and it's going to fundamentally reshape the architecture of the internet. And when I say architecture, I mean the companies behind the internet in a way that I don't think anybody would have thought of when we thought of, hey, what's going to be one of the outcomes of having all of these devices to the internet, connect to the internet, not patched? It wouldn't have said, I wouldn't have been the person to stand up and say, well, small independent ISPs are going to collapse. That wouldn't have been the outcome that I would have expected. And this is just one of what might be many.
Mm-hmm. And because the other problem is, people want their Internet of Things device to cost $30.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you're not going to get very much software for that much.
And of course, everybody wants to be able to put their magic on top of it that they can monetize. So they've got to somehow ship you a $30 product that they've also done R&D for their magic layer, and it's never going to scale. Oh, this is why it really comes down to properly. I just there's so many stories right now about people.
The story we just went back to the Western Digital NAS.
Yeah,
I was just laughable. It's like, who thought this stuff up?
Yeah, you mentioned
who wrote this code.
You mentioned the elections. The guy that runs the Department of Homeland Security was testifying yesterday to Congress, and he said that there's now been 17 states that have asked for federal support to boost up their websites, to prepare their websites for cyber attacks. And what strikes me about it is if you really just patched your crap and really got everything up to date that way, that would be such a huge leap forward in security for everyone. And if there was just a way we could roll out these updates to these Internet of Things devices, it would be, again, the same thing. These DDoS attacks would be reduced, all of this stuff. Because like you said in the first story, we now have mitigation for reflection attacks that we're starting to put in place, but we don't have a solution when there's just hundreds of thousands of crappy devices connected. And so that's
because the other big problem is, there aren't updates for some of these devices because, the company set up, sold 100,000 of them, and then folded up, right?
Yeah.
Or
ended end of life. Even Google has now done this where they've ended life of an Internet of Things product. And it's like, okay, well, I have that set up in my home.
Well, you should unplug it and throw it away.
Yeah.
That's what Google wants you to do and replace it with a new one. The
Right.
problem is people, it's like, well, I paid for it and it still works, so I want to use it. It's
That's-
like, yeah, but you're actually breaking the entire internet.
And I think consumers have a different perception of devices you put in the home that become part of your home. I think they expect like much longer lifespan for that kind of stuff. Any other thoughts on the story?
But it's really problematic because it comes down to we can't solve the problem because we can't even tell people which of the devices in their home is actually the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a key part. Yeah. Yeah, and especially for average consumers. Maybe our audience, not as big of a challenge. They could figure it out. Regular people that are buying these things at Lowe's and Walmart and Amazon.
Well, people don't even fathom the possibility that their TV is being used to attack people. Most people think the TV's only attacking you by putting Donald Trump in your face.
I thought you were going to say pharmaceutical commercial. That's good too. All right. Well,
I don't watch regular broadcast TV, so I don't even think about the fact of the number of times if you watch regular TV with all the pharmaceutical ads,
yeah,
the number of times you hear anal leakage
is bad, man. It's real bad.
Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, when you watch the nightly news here in the States, it's literally all pharmaceutical commercials some nights. It's so bad. That's why here on the TechSNAP program, we try to pick sponsors that actually match our audience, like DigitalOcean. Head over to DigitalOcean.com and use our promo code SNAPOcean. That's all one word, lowercase, and it gives you a $10 credit over at DigitalOcean. Now, DigitalOcean is a simple cloud hosting platform that's really easy to get a server spun up on their totally badass infrastructure. For $5 a month, you can get a nice rig, or you can pay hourly and really take advantage of our SnapOcean $10 promo. And they've got data centers in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, Toronto, Germany, India. Let's be honest, the only place you want to deploy those is Toronto. And they have the best interface. They really do have the best interface for managing something like this, and they match it with a great documented API that has tons of good open source code already written. Check it out at DigitalOcean.com. They now have high memory availability, but one of the things that we talk about from time to time is their super cool, badass block storage. Highly available storage. You never run out of space. You can add up to 16 terabytes of SSD-based block storage. Now, you might say to me, Chris, that sounds pretty cool. I love myself some block storage. I love myself some SSD-backed block storage at that.
The big thing there is just, so you get the amount that you need right now, and then when your ZFS pool gets near full,
boom,
you just add some more.
Yeah.
You just dynamically resize. You don't actually have to do anything. You just like, hey, I need some more.
It's two great technologies coming together, and DigitalOcean has a great tutorial written by Chip Marshall over on their site that tells you how to configure an encrypted ZFS pool with a DigitalOcean block storage. You attach it, you can increase the size. It's a great write-up from beginning to setting up the partitioning all the way to the end. That might just be something you could use our promo code to just try out, play around with some really great technology, and then set it up in production. And don't forget about their private networking, where this could get even just if you have a back-end database or a back-end storage system and you want to communicate with front-end servers, private networking is perfect for that. Doesn't count against transfer, anything like that. DigitalOcean.com and use our promo code SNAPOcean. That's one word. You type it in there, you apply it to your account, and you'll get a $10 credit at DigitalOcean.com. And SNAPOcean is the promo code you use. Big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Yeah, I kind of like the idea of playing with the block storage more and more, Alan, for different little projects I have. I have an MB server running up there right now, and that could be kind of perfect for that.
Well, the nice thing is that you basically size it and don't pay for more space than you need.
Yeah.
But add space as you need it.
Yeah, and you can also add RAM, or there's other nice things you can turn up as you need it too. So,
well, that's the other thing. It's because DigitalOcean allows you to resize your droplet relatively quickly, as long as you haven't changed the size of the storage of the actual SSD storage that they include as part of the VM.
Right.
So if you keep that small, you can resize up and resize down. So like make what it says oftentimes, if you don't need a lot of storage for the OS, make it the smallest one. Start with the $5 one.
That's what I do.
And immediately turn it off and resize it up to the size with the amount of RAM you need.
That is literally my plan for my future droplets.
Up and down as you need with basically a reboot.
I'll have a nice tight OS drive, which will save me money, and then I'll just scale up with the block. That's my plan for my future droplets. DigitalOcean.com.
Basically, it solves the one thing DigitalOcean didn't have before, which was I want to put my own cloud or Nextcloud or
And be able to
Envy or
grow
whatever
it.
up in the cloud. And it's like, well, I need more storage than the 50 gigabytes they were going to give me.
Yeah, and now they also have really high availability, like high memory, like 224 gigabytes. Like you can go crazy with the RAM. So you combine that, it's nuts. The Snap Ocean promo code will get you started.
Yeah, I have a ticket open with them asking about possibly getting high CPU without high memory. For some stuff I need to do.
I'd be curious to know how that goes. I would. So check it out. They also
It's probably a little harder for them to do.
Something we don't mention a lot, but if you're going to use it in your corporation or with your project, this might be nice. They have team support as well.
Yes, we use that at Scale Engine.
Do you?
Because I needed to be able to have other people from our team be able to spin up droplets and so on, but not access our credit card stuff and so on.
Yes, exactly.
So it works great.
DigitalOcean.com.
And they've got it now so that it's easy to do. So the people on our team have their own DigitalOcean droplet account that they pay for their own stuff. And they just click a button. When they're logged in, they just click and they switch to their Scale Engine profile or whatever. And then they have access to our stuff. So they can, they don't have to log out and log in with a different password or manage a whole bunch of different accounts. They can put it all together in the one account and just flip between the different teams.
That is so nice.
It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really super nice. And it's nice for collaboration because then you're all speaking the same vernacular. You all know the same things. It's the same dashboard. It makes it really productive. So it sounds like the group over at Firefox, the guys there, and the gals there, they're getting serious. They're getting mean. They're putting their foot down. Time to follow some rules. I don't know. What's going on, Alan?
So Firefox is preparing to to remove one of the certificate authorities from the root store.
It does sound like putting the foot down.
Yeah. So we talked about this option a couple of times, but no CA had been slapped with this yet. But the organization that develops Firefox, Mozilla, has recommended the browser block the digital credentials issued by the China-based certificate authority for 12 months after discovering that it cut corners and undermined the entire TLS ecosystem that encrypts and authenticates websites.
Oh.
So the practices of WoSign basically were woefully inadequate and possibly broke security of the entire internet. So they say the browser-trusted WoSign authority intentionally backdated certificates that it issued over the past 9 months to avoid the industry-mandated ban on the use of the SHA-1 hashing algorithm. If you remember when we talked about this a couple years ago, the CA Browser Forum came up with the rules saying that after January of 2016, no issuing any certificates that have an expiration date after January of 2016 that use this old hashing algorithm. You have to issue ones with the new one. They say the SHA-1 based signatures were barred at the beginning of the year because the industry consensus are that they are unacceptably susceptible to cryptographic collision attacks that can create counterfeit credentials. Basically, someone could spoof the certificate by brute forcing until they found a colliding SHA-1 hash. To satisfy customers who experience difficulty retiring the old hashing function, WoSign continued to use it anyway and concealed its use by dating certificates prior to the first of the year. So they faked the not before date on the certificates so that Firefox's automatic block of any certificate that didn't meet the rules wouldn't kick in, allowing their customers to continue to use the old certificates, the new certificates with the not allowed anymore hashing algorithm.
Okay.
Mozilla also accused WoSign of improperly concealing its acquisition of the Israeli certificate authority Startcom, which was used to issue at least one of these improperly issued certificates. So, one of the rules of the CAB forum is that, each certificate authority is separate, and if they have dealings with each other, that has to be, made public or whatever, right? They have to tell, it's like, hey, we're buying this other certificate authority. We're actually the same company now.
Yeah.
But they didn't. So Mozilla says here, taking into account all the issues listed above, Mozilla's certificate authority team has lost confidence in the ability of WoSign and Startcom to faithfully and competently discharge the functions of a certificate authority. Therefore, we propose that, starting on a date to be determined in the near future, Mozilla products will no longer trust newly issued certificates issued by either of these two CA brands. So their plan there is that existing certificates that have already been issued by these companies will continue to work to avoid impacting regular customers who paid for a certificate and it would just go away and break things. That would be bad. But Mozilla will not trust any newly issued certificates. So for at least the 12 months after a date to be determined quite soon, these companies will basically be out of business. They won't be able to sell certificates. Well, they'll still be able to sell certificates, but they won't work in Firefox.
Yeah,
and I'm guessing that other browsers will probably follow suit. And if that happens, then nobody's going to want to buy a certificate from these people anymore, right?
Who would want to, even in Firefox? I mean, that's just...
Yeah, exactly. WoSign's practices come under scrutiny after an IT administrator at the University of Central Florida used the service to obtain a certificate for UCF.edu. He soon discovered that he was mistakenly gotten a certificate for www.ucf.edu. So basically, the process to verify that you actually control the domain was not very strict. In fact, the one that WoSign came up with is if you can answer our query on whatever port number you pick, we'll trust you. So by being able to listen on a random high port number, he was able to get this certificate. To verify the error wasn't isolated, the admin then used his control over a subdomain of GitHub, his username.github.com and username.github.io, to generate certificates for github.com, github.io, and www.github.io. When the admin finally succeeded in alerting WoSign of the improperly issued GitHub certificates, WoSign still didn't catch the improperly issued University of Central Florida certificates and allowed it to remain valid for more than a year. So when the admin tried to contact WoSign, he basically got nowhere, and he had to basically contact Google and get Google to contact the CA. And
Google has some weight.
Yes. And while they fixed the ones that they got told about, they didn't then go and look and make sure nobody else had already done this and find the other ones that the admin had previously done, which is one of the things you're supposed to do. For reasons that aren't clear, Mozilla's final report doesn't actually make explicit mention of the certificates involved in the GitHub and UCF domains that are documented here in August. So, Mozilla wasn't even holding that particular incident against them necessarily. So the Mozilla report highlights a whole bunch of issues. I've picked a couple of interesting ones here. WoSign has an issue first, validate later process where it's acceptable to detect misissued certificates during validation the next working day and then revoke them at that point, which in Mozilla's report is issue N. They've lettered all the issues because there was too many to number them. So apparently WoSign would just issue certificates for whatever you asked for, and then the next day when the people came into the office to work, they would double check the certificates should have been issued. And if they weren't, they would just cancel them. The problem is, how much damage could someone have done in the, 8 hours or more that the office was closed? I could get a certificate for Google and do all kinds of stuff before you cancel the certificate. If the experience of their website ownership validation mechanism, that thing with the high port number, is anything to go by, it seems doubtful that WoSign keeps appropriately detailed and unalterable logs of their issuances. So when they give out certificates. The level of understanding of the certificate system by their engineers and the level of quality control and testing exercised over changes to their system leaves a great deal to be desired. It does not seem that they are appropriate cultural practices to develop secure and robust software.
Yikes.
Issue V and issue L. They also mentioned that all certificate authorities are supposed to maintain a document describing their process. It turns out that WoSign would often change their process and only update the documentation when they were reminded that, hey, your documentation doesn't match what you're actually doing by their auditors and so on. Also, they have here, for reasons which still remain unclear, WoSign appeared determined to hide the fact that it had purchased StartCom, actively misleading Mozilla and the public about the situation.
Suspicious.
Yes. Also, WoSign's auditors, Ernst & Young Hong Kong, have failed to detect multiple issues that they should have detected with the certificate authority. So the audits they were having done were not good enough either. Although that in particular might have been a problem with the auditor. Although the fact that WoSign gets to pick who their auditor is might be a problem as well. Anyway, So Google has a report that they issued, which is a Google Doc here I've linked. And they also have a wiki page where they kind of break down each of the different issues and have the details about them. And then WoSign has their response, which mostly seems their way to try to solve this is that they pushed all of their certificates that they issued during 2015 and the first half of 2016 through to Google's certificate transparency servers, which basically means every certificate they issue, they'll post to this Google server and one of their own. And it's an unalterable log showing every certificate they issued, and it's basically a way to see what they're issuing and make sure that it's not for domains that they're not supposed to be issuing certificates for and so on. But that's probably too little too late at this point. But the full response from WoSign is also linked as a PDF in the show notes.
Well, nice breakdown, Alan. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was, geez.
Yeah. So
what a
maybe
mess.
this, if especially after just buying StartCom, if it basically means this puts StartCom out of business because they won't be able to issue certificates anymore, that will, I'm sure the people that owned StartCom and sold it will be kind of disenfranchised to feel all their hard work get destroyed. Mm-hmm. But also, this might get other certificate authorities to finally snap into shape when, one of their competitors actually gets the hammer dropped on their head.
Yeah. Look at them, and I would bet if I was going to put money on it, which I would, if I was going to put stake on it, I would bet a stake that Google will follow suit.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mr.
They already threatened to do it to Symantec. So.
Yeah, exactly. Symantec, of all things. All right. Well, I want to tell everybody about IX Systems at ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. That's where you go to land to support this show and learn more about the incredible IX systems built by those industry-leading Intel processors. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. Contact them for your next open source workload build. Dig around on their site, take a look-see, and then when you get there, also turn over to their blog for a bit. They have some interesting stuff about compression and deduplication. If you want to read this, I like the title. It's Data and Compression and Deduplication Demystified. And this is a nice one written over on the IX blog. For any of us who want to do this kind of stuff, I think you can check out the IX blog and find all kinds of cool stuff, like events are often posted over there as well. And then dig around their site and learn more about the offers and the services. I think, I remember it was, I don't remember the year, but we were building a terminal server rack of systems, and we had all of these different bids out. And if I had known back then, a company like IX Systems was around, I think we would have fundamentally had just such a better experience, because the hardware vendor we eventually went with, they did okay on the support side, but they ended up having an entire generation of bad controllers that we had to take systems out of production to update. That happens. It happens. Mm-hmm. But we were also bid on those same servers by an entire bad generation of tape backup drives. This is back in the day. And it left us with this constant juggling act of bringing systems down to fix them and having this really, really poor experience where they were pointing the fingers at each other for, it's the hardware vendor, it's the software vendor. And we wasted so much time from the initial quoting of the project, getting it into production, and then resolving all of the issues. I could only imagine how much smoother that would have been with a company like IX, who's been around since before the dot-com boom. They know how to do this, and they've really dialed in their hardware partnerships, their community partnerships, their investment in their staffing. I'm not just saying this. That's why crazy guys like Alan Jude over there, who actually care about these things, go with IX.
Yes. Well, one of the bigger things is more that. Now I forgot what I was going to say.
IX Systems, I think the bigger thing really is that we're not just fans. We're not just they don't just sponsor us. They're one of the few sponsors that we asked to come on the show because we are customers ourselves.
Yeah, but when you go to get a quote is where you'll notice the difference.
Yes.
If you try to ask most places, they're like, okay, so here's a pamphlet of stuff, and when do you want to set up a call so we can talk to you for an hour or whatever? It's like, you can call IX and talk to them, and oftentimes it's the best way to get it done. But at the same time, it's like, if you just give them the details, it's like, I need a server that does this, and it's like, you get a quote back in a couple hours, and it's like, oh, okay, signed, all right, ordered, done. I've heard of companies that were just so used to the old process of going through it with like somebody else that they were just confused when they got a quote that was of something ready to order from IX. And they're like, what do we do with this? It's like, well, you order it. It's ready to go. It's just the painlessness. But the reason I use IX over the way I used to do it, where I'd like build the servers myself, is just it takes so much of the headache away. They know more than I do about the stuff, and they'll make sure that, it's be like, are you sure you want to do it that way? There's, you know about this, right?
Yeah.
But they're also not constantly trying to upsell me on anything, right?
Yes,
it's
very true.
like, here's a recommendation, but it's your server.
You can do what you want. Yep. That's been my experience too, and that's really nice because you know that they're doing it because they want you to ultimately have a really great build, so that way down the road you're inclined to buy another IX system. It's not just about one system for them; it's about establishing a long-term relationship.
Well, and yes, it's also because they're not a huge company, but they're big enough. But they actually care. They've been through the whole .com thing. They understand that just having the most sales or whatever isn't the thing. They want a company that they can be proud of. It's an employee-owned company, and they actually care about what you think about them, not just how many dollars you pay them, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, really. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP, and a big thank you to IX for sponsoring the TechSNAP program.
Also, make sure you check out MeetBSD. They're hosting MeetBSD at Berkeley in California, November 11th and 12th. If you are going, you should register now. There's a discounted registration rate until the end of September. Or actually, I think it's only till the 30th. So you need to register the end of September. You have until the end of September to register. So if you're watching the live stream, you should do that now. Yeah. And if you're watching the download, it's like you have literally only hours left to register.
Go now!
You can still register after, but it'll cost more money, and that would be silly. Register now.
It'd still be worth it, though. It really would be.
Yes, definitely. Myself and Chris Moore will both be there, and we hope to do some.
I've heard from some folks that are going, so
yes,
I would love.
I convinced at least 2 people at the conference in Europe to come over for it.
I feel like if I could park Lady Jupiter at the facilities there in the parking lot, I would go. But I was otherwise.
So probably.
Yeah, I know, and otherwise
somebody sent you a link to nearby campgrounds and so on.
Yeah, I still think it was like 48 minutes away or something like that. So.
No, most of them were.
Was it closer? Oh, I'll take another look.
Miles or something.
Well, then maybe
there was like 4 within 18 miles.
I would love an excuse to go down there. So you never know.
Check out that link on Twitter again.
Okay. Yeah, from Ben, right? It was Ben, right? Or was it? Yeah.
I think so.
All right. So why don't we, before we jump out of the news segment, let's give a little pluggy plug here for episode 161 of the BSD Now program. The BSD Bromance. What is that?
We did an interview about Bro, which is an intrusion detection system.
Okay, I was like, what are they doing with that title? Now it makes sense. The Bromance.
Yes, we interviewed Michael Shirk about Bro, the traffic recording system.
BSD Now, episode 161. You can go get the HD version, and then you get more Jude in your face, because this is about the halfway point. When we wrap up, don't be out of Jude. Go get more Jude and Chris. It's just a different Chris. And the BSD Now program, you can find it over at jupiterbroadcasting.com or bsdnow.tv. But with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the JB website. Or maybe you started a thread in our subreddit at techsnap.reddit.com. Jens writes in with our first one about backups. He says, hey guys, I love all the shows. I listen to the all RSS feed, and I was interested in your opinion on backup software. I've already looked at Bacula and BearOS and Dervish as well as rsync. What are other solutions that I maybe could look at? And what are some of the ones you're using? My environment is very diverse. 2 free NAS, of which one is being moved to an offsite, and another to a central server. He wants to be able to control the backups across these guys. He has the one Linux netbook he needs to back up, a one Linux PC he needs to back up, a one Win 7 netbook, a one Win 7 10 notebook, and a Windows 10 PC, which might do dual boot later. And hopefully, if he gets them to run maybe a 32-bit Linux distro on there or a BSD distro, he'd run that on the notebook. So he wants to know something that will run across a pretty diverse, like FreeNAS potentially, notebooks running BSD, Linux, and Windows. And he says, greetings from cloudy Germany.
Bacula definitely has quite a few advantages for that because
that was my
they
first.
have a client
He says
that will
he's
work.
tried it, and I'm wondering.
Well, he says he looked at it. I don't know if he tried it.
It
can look a little daunting to set up, but it's really not that difficult.
No, I've done it a few times, and come on, if I can do it, you guys can do it.
I haven't done it that recently, but I know people have, and it's probably the easiest one.
Yeah.
Because it has the cross-platform file director for all of the or file daemon for Linux, Windows, Mac.
Yes, and it does the bare metal restore, which is very nice. Now, that's kind of a shame.
Because rsync isn't really a backup, although
I was about to mention
cheat with snapshot and so on.
I was about to mention backup PC because really for backup PC to work, all you need is a Samba share. And if you can share out the files that are important to you or let it connect over SSH and rsync, it can back them up. And backup PC gives you a web interface to restore them. And for me, I've always been the kind of person I don't really want the OS. I don't even want my applications. What I really want is the data, and when I have to reload a system, I'll just reload it with the latest OS, the latest applications, the latest drivers, et cetera, and I'll remove my data back onto the rig, import into the applications, good to go. And so Backup PC was always a great application for me because it focused on data, it focused on deduplication, and it was really kind of elegant, but it hasn't been updated officially. The last release was on January 11th, 2015, which is...
Right.
Yeah. So I think both of us would say, and I hate that we always answer it this way, but legitimately, we both independently, like many, many years before I knew this man, Alan Jude, I was deploying Bacula because it was just a great, and I was deploying Bacula after I had experience with a lot of other enterprise backup systems, and everything from Tivoli to, of course, Backup Exec, NT Backup, but all of like the different variations on those system tools that were huge enterprise costs that my clients bought or banks bought. At the end of the day, when it was on me to deploy a backup system, when it was like this is this guy's choice, and if we lose data, it's his fault. I chose Bacula. I would sort of double down on the Bacula recommendation. I know we mentioned it a lot, but it's
you
pretty
normally
good.
Kind of shy away from Bacula when you're talking about 1 or 2 or 3 machines.
Yeah.
But with you having, was it 7?
And he's got multiple different OSs.
Yeah. Then at that point, it's probably worth Bacula. Because, the other option really is Samba share, either, have the Linux machines connect to the Samba share on the FreeNAS and push with rsync, and then take your snapshots on rsync and replicate them to the other, or take your snapshots on the FreeNAS and replicate it to the other FreeNAS.
Yeah.
But, pushing from Windows is a bit more difficult because you have to run a script or something. So you can have the Windows machines share, and then the FreeNAS can mount them and pull with rsync, but it's just not as nice as Bacula.
No, and here's the thing. The Bacula client running on a Windows box it's capable of pulling from the shadow volume copy. So if you have a file that's locked or something like that, having a Bacula service running on that Windows box gives it access to volume shadow copies and things that when rsync is connecting remotely is just simply not exposed to it via Windows. Yep. And so if you want a truly integrated solution, you kind of want something that can use volume shadow copy. So look at that since you do have plenty of Windows boxes.
And that's the other thing. If you have your snapshots named correctly on your FreeNAS, you can actually access the backups. The snapshots of your backups as if they were volume shadow copies.
Right.
They actually show up in the Windows interface that way.
Yeah.
Which can make it very handy to get individual files back when you don't want to do a full restore. Because, oftentimes, the thing you really want to restore from backup is the homework I was just working on, or the document I was writing, or that, whatever I was working on. It's like 1 or 2 files, not necessarily I need to restore the entire computer because it died. Although often it does. The approach I've taken for that is that my computer has very little storage in it. It's got like 240 gig SSDs mirrored, but I don't use most of that space is set aside for recording BSD Now live. And then all of the storage is actually my E drive, which is a Samba share off my FreeNAS. And all my applications are even installed there, and I share a lot of data between my 2 desktops, my work desktop and my home desktop, because they're in the same building. I
think a lot of people are doing that because they just have laptops now too. And laptops traditionally, that's about the size you'd have in a laptop. And so you have, and why not? Why not make your front-end machine something that's semi-disposable and then invest long-term in a back-end storage solution? So Best of luck to you. Jorian writes in with a little salty question. He says, "Hello, Alan and Chris. So I heard last week on TechSNAP that Alan was currently evaluating Salt as a possible replacement for Puppet. I've been using Salt at home and it's been great so far in my testing. However, the problem I have is that it requires a Salt Minion client. It seems to me like installing the Salt Minion client should be the job for Salt. So what is the possible best practice for this? Thanks for all the great show content and sysadmin advice, Jay." So basically, Jay's saying here, I like Salt except for the fact that I have to install the Salt agent everywhere before I can use Salt.
Currently we're using Puppet, and we have to do the same thing. But
how do you deploy it to a new system? Say IX.
So we install the OS, and then we install Puppet, and then we go over on the Puppet Master. We say, yes, that's one of my servers, and then it does everything else for us.
You install the OS, or the vendor installs the OS?
It depends. Usually, I do it because I do it really special my way.
Of course, you do.
But a lot of people have it set up with like a Pixie boot type system where you just put the machine in the install VLAN, you boot it up, and it gets your common image splatted on it.
And is the install VLAN like the default VLAN? Like so,
not usually, because we wouldn't want to accidentally boot something and overwrite the OS. If you're in the install VLAN and you boot, you're Pixie booting and you're getting your disk.
How do you get a new system that you've never touched before in the install VLAN?
Usually by just configuring the switch to put the port it's in.
Okay. Oh, yeah, sure. So you know which port it's plugged into in the data center.
It depends, where it's going.
I mean, obviously, this seems like a job for your default install image.
Right. But Ansible, which is an alternative to Salt and Puppet, is more of all you really require is having like SSH and Python on the remote server. But then again, it's like, isn't installing Python the job of the management system?
Yeah, you could go down there.
There is apparently Salt-SSH, which you could probably use to at least bootstrap installing the Salt Minion on the server.
Just what I was going to mention. Yep.
The chat room brought that one up. I'm not that familiar with Salt. We looked at it, although some of the stuff we do really, really lends itself towards the exported resources of basically the way we do a bunch of like our Nagios monitoring at Scale Engine is each machine has a Puppet template, and it basically writes its config file for Nagios and stores that in the database. So each server says, okay, I have these services. Here's my name. Here's my IP. I have these services, and writes out this config file for Nagios and stores it in our Puppet database. Then our 3 Nagios servers go and say, hey, give me everybody's Nagios config. And they download them all, spot them on their disk, and Nagios starts up. And new servers get added automatically. Old servers get removed automatically. And it works very nicely.
I like it.
We'd have to just find a different way to do that, to use Salt.
So here's what I have linked in the show notes to kind of help out is over on docs.saltstack.com, there is several different video guides on how to do this, but also just documentation, and including agentless quick start with Salt SSH, configuration, and getting it all deployed. So we'll have you can click on this in the show notes. You not only will you get video guides about it, but there's also just fantastic written documentation if you're more of a well, actually, you're watching this, so you probably are more of a visual. So you'll probably enjoy a visual person. You'll probably enjoy those videos that we have linked up to there. We get a lot of questions about Chef and Puppet and Ansible. In fact, there's a couple that didn't quite make it into this week's episode all along this topic. It's really, really one of the things that we're hearing a lot about. Speaking of that, Carlo writes in about FreeNAS. This is a long one. He says, hi, Alan, Chris, everyone. Thanks for reading this. I know you guys keep on saying how good FreeNAS is, but you never really say how great it is. I took the plunge over the weekend and installed FreeNAS on my homemade Windows file server. It's got an i7 with 16 gigs of RAM in it. I decided I would play around with FreeNAS 10 beta because, why not? Before I go further, I have to mention that I have never used FreeNAS or FreeBSD and have only used Linux remotely to manage my web server. Anyway, after having a non-issue of apparent freeze while installing, setting it up was a total breeze. I started with 2, I think I call them data sets, comprising of 4 3-terabyte drives and 4 4-terabyte disks, both in a RAID Z1.
Okay, so that would be 2 VDEVs rather than data sets. Data sets are the file systems you create on top of the pool. This is how you configured your pool. Although it's unclear whether he created 2 pools or 2 VDEVs in 1 pool.
Right, I agree. And he says, and now he's got some questions. And he's got 4 of them. And I'll just ask you one and you can answer. What is an ARC demand data?
So Arc demand data, I'm guessing he's reading the stats output of the ZFS stats.
Yeah.
So Arc demand data is data that a program is asking for out of the Arc. So it's how much data a program is actually asking for.
And the Arc is... Just so he knows.
So Arc is the adaptive replacement cache. It's the way that ZFS does caching. Most other programs do a thing called LRU, so least recently used. So they monitor, so they have a big cache of files, and every time you use a file, that file goes to the top of the list and till the cache is full. And then when you use a new file, it has to make room for this new file. So it deletes the files from the bottom of the list until there's enough room to put a new thing at the top.
Okay.
Right? So the file that you used the longest ago gets removed from the cache so that one you just used can go in the top. The problem with this is if you have to do certain operations like, say, your backup, where you read every single file on the server, your cache becomes useless because all it contains is the last couple of files you read.
Sure, yeah.
So the Arc breaks the cache up into 4 chunks. Really 2, but there's 4 lists. First, it has your most recently used, which is basically the same as the LRU, except for it's sorted by the most recently used file instead of deleting the most least recently used file. But it also has an MFU, the most frequently used files. So by keeping these 2 lists and trying to balance the amount of cache space between them, it means if you do something like a backup that reads every single file, that will basically blow out your most recently used cache, but your most frequently used will still be there. The files that you're using all the time are still going to stay in the cache, and you're not going to lose performance on them like you did on if you had just an LRU.
Right.
The other thing is it has ghost lists. So for both of the MRU and the MFU, it has a list of the files that have been in the cache a couple of times but keep falling out. And so it basically blacklists them and won't put them in the cache. That way, it gives other files a chance to actually have a turn in the cache and find out that maybe they would actually do better there.
Fascinating. Mm-hmm. That is really interesting. That's very smart too, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Yes. All right.
Well, for Arc demand data, so there are multiple stats. There's Arc demand data hits and misses, but then there's Arc demand metadata, which is information about the files rather than the files themselves.
Okay.
And then the opposite of that is Arc prefetch data. So basically, when you ask ZFS to read a file, it reads what you ask, but it probably also rounds it up and reads a bit more, assuming that if you've read the first bit of a file, you're probably going to want to read the next bit after. So the chunk of that you didn't ask for, but ZFS read anyway, that's the Arc prefetch data.
Oh, okay.
And by looking at those hit and miss ratios, you can see whether the read ahead actually did you any good or not. And that's what that stat means. So basically, Arc demand data is the data you actually asked for, whereas Arc prefetch data is the data ZFS thinks you're going to want soon and read up into the cache anyway.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Okay, so here's number 2. My machine only has 16 gigabytes of RAM. When I start copying files to the free NAS, the RAM jumps up to almost full, and then it just stays there. Is that a problem?
So I don't know how you're measuring that, but it depends. So ZFS, if you're looking at the stats, the Arc, which is this cache we talked about, does default to using up most of your RAM.
But it's actually, I think he's talking about copying from his workstation to the free NAS server, and I think he might be talking about memory usage. Well, actually, I'm not sure what he's talking about the memory usage.
Yeah. So in particular, most likely what this is the cache. Because free RAM is wasted RAM.
Right.
So ZFS will keep as much of the files you're using recently in RAM, because if you were using them recently, you're probably going to use them again. And if you can pull them out of RAM instead of off the disk, it'll be much faster. Now, if your system needs the RAM for something else, it will give it back. But it's a free NAS, so you probably, hopefully, aren't going to be doing much else with it. So yes, having it use up most of your RAM is a good thing.
Yeah. And
you can fit more in it. Putting more in it will make it faster.
Yeah.
But it's not required.
Yeah, he says, I can already hear Alan tell me, more RAM is a good thing. He says, I also have 4 SSDs, 2 60 gigabyte, and 2 256 gigabyte SSDs. Could they best be used for? I need to set up a few VMs to run occasionally, so should I just maybe put them on the SSDs? My current setup easily saturates my network.
Yeah, because of the small amount of RAM you have and the fact that your bulk usage isn't going to need a cache like an L2 ARC, what you can do is take those two 256 gig SSDs, make it a new pool as a mirror, and put your VMs on it. It won't fit very many VMs, but it'll make them faster. You could try to do the read and write caches in ZFS, but because the amount of RAM you have is small enough, the entries just saying, oh, that block's over on this SSD would take up so much of the RAM that you would actually get less cache efficiency. So yes, if you want to use them, just make a separate pool and just put certain things on.
Nice. Yeah, I think, Carlo, this probably applies to a lot of people. And here's his last question, and I don't know if I follow his logic. He says, I have issues transferring files that start with a period. Is that just an issue with the beta of FreeNAS?
I don't know. Maybe that's something to do with Samba.
That was my first
beta
thought
of FreeNAS. In general, I would recommend staying on their stable branch.
I think they definitely would at this point. I mean, if you're going to be crazy, at least wait till the RC.
It's really more of an alpha.
Yeah, it only works in Chrome right now. They're totally redoing some major stuff, huge improvements long term. But Carlo, aka JDE, I am a rolling distribution kind of guy, and I would not be rolling FreeNAS 10 just yet. I would say
because it's the operating system is stable underneath. It's
sure.
The whole web interface thing is all new,
and that's what I think maybe is worth underscoring. So when they get to, and this is now probably Alan won't agree with this, but this is how I roll. When they get around RC level, because they're based on a stable known FreeBSD target. Honestly, when FreeNAS 10 gets around a RC level, I'm probably going to start deploying it, and I just because the way the OS is separated from the dataset. If later on I have to reload the entire OS, I just reconnect it back to the dataset, and it's not really a big deal. But right. I would avoid running the beta at this stage because you may run into issues that are just temporary, and you're always going to have that question in the back of your mind. Is this because it's a beta? Am I doing something wrong? Do I just not know the configuration? You can eliminate that kind of nebulous uncertainty by just running the stable release. And then not only do you have a certainty there about being on the stable version, but you have way more documentation and way more community support available to you. So there you go.
Although he sent a nice screenshot. I hadn't actually seen this much of the new FreeNAS 10.
I know, right? It is. Yeah.
Yes, them exposing the ARC demand data as a graph of just things that don't make sense. It's probably led to quite a bit of confusion.
You could probably send them some feedback. You could probably, they might like You're right here. So I'm showing it now there on the stream. That is, yeah. I like this.
But basically, you see that the ARC demand data spikes match up exactly with your network card. And basically, it's when data is being pulled out of the ARC.
Yeah.
If your network was much higher or if your ARC demand didn't match up, then because the ARC demand data and the network graph match up, it means most of the answers to your requests are coming directly from RAM and are super fast.
Oh, that's what that means. So that's actually the fact that the network I/O graph and the ARC graph almost match up line for line is an indication that when the network request is coming in, it's being answered by ARC.
Yeah, it's a hit. Well, you have to look at the colors for whether it's a hit or a miss, but it looks like that's mostly metadata. So it looks like most of the requests that are in the graph right there are they used colors a little too close together, like orange and light orange.
See, I think they could use your feedback. You probably you're good at this.
But basically, it looks like it's just stuff like browsing through files or something.
Metadata, like open up directories, pulling down information about it, stuff like
that. Things.
Now, you know what? Props too for sending in a screenshot. That's great. Yes. Thanks, Carlo. Yeah, and it does look good. The new UI.
Why I was asking about ARC demand data. I'd never heard anyone ask about that before. And I was thinking of this advanced tool I use, but no, they put a graph.
No, it's a graph. Of course, right? Okay, so Michael writes in with a FreeNAS and ZFS and SSD question, and he prefaces it with a great introduction and also about a bug he bumped into. But he has a couple of core questions I'll jump right to. He says, how would I send snapshots to a FreeNAS machine? He's got here, I'll give you the basic setup. He wants to know how to do this. He's got a FreeNAS with ZFS, so he has Anagros on a machine with now using ZFS, and it's worked great. He's configured them. He's configured 4 SSDs and put them in a striped configuration. And he's got a link to benchmarks he's got here. So he's got questions how to send snapshots to his FreeNAS machine, how to restore if an update goes bad, like how to actually use these snapshots to recover. And then he's got a couple other questions after that. So how to send snapshots, because he's got ZFS on the workstation, ZFS on the FreeNAS, and then how to recover.
So he wants to send ZFS, a snapshot of his Integros machine to his FreeNAS?
Correct.
Well, just follow the instructions. Like, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Is your answer Google it?
No, my answer is buy my book.
There you go.
But like,
that's nice.
It's because ZFS is ZFS, so
right.
You just follow the instructions you get anywhere, like the FreeBSD handbook. So yeah, on the Integros machine, you would do ZFS send, and then the snapshot you want to send, and then pipe that into like SSH or whatever to the FreeNAS, and then it would pipe it into ZFS receive running on the FreeNAS, and then
here's his ultimate question. So say he does that. He figures out, he uses ZFS send to send it to the FreeNAS rig. He goes ahead, he installs one of his crazy rolling updates, and his whole machine borks up. What is his best method for rolling back? Can he do a ZFS receive and pull down those snapshots?
So you would probably start off of a live CD or something version of your chosen OS, and then basically make a new pool on your working drives and then receive all the data again, and then it will be back on your machine. This is integrated into the TrueOS installer. So, if you fire up the installer on your fixed after it was broken machine and just hit restore instead of install, point it at your FreeNAS, and it sucks it down for you. So if you have TrueOS, which is the new version of PCBSD, and a FreeNAS, they're integrated together and do all this for you with just nice clicky GUI buttons. But if it's Integros, you're going to have to use the command line to do it, but it's relatively simple.
Yeah. And again, there's that book.
Yes, ZFS. ZFSbook.com has both FreeBSD Mastery ZFS and Advanced ZFS, which covers replication.
I bet those commands might be in that book.
Yep. With full examples and how to do it without needing root access on either machine.
Oh, that is nice. So Chris writes
he had a third follow-up question.
Yeah, he did.
So as far as I understand it, if one of the 4 SSDs dies because he has them all striped together, the whole array goes away. Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
And he says, how would I be able to recover from this? You wouldn't. You would have to, install all the data again. So yeah, you could replace the dead drive and then make a whole new pool and restore it from it. Really what you should do is not use Stripe, but set up RAID Z1 across your 4 drives, and then if one of the 4 SSDs dies, you can just replace it and you don't lose anything. You only get the space of 3 of your 4 SSDs, but your speed's going to be pretty good with using 3 or 4 SSDs, right?
Yeah, really.
Striping is bad. Don't do that.
Okay, so now we go to Chris's email. Now he has a long question about content filtering with pfSense and not making it look like it's behind a proxy.
Yeah. So he doesn't want to use a proxy to do the filtering,
and he's kind of comparing to the Sonic Wall functionality.
So he doesn't control the endpoints, the actual devices that everybody on the network's going to use. So he can't configure them all to use a proxy. So there's 2 options. There's the transparent proxy setup where basically the firewall pushes the content through the proxy no matter what. So any connection going out to port 80, the firewall will basically divert it through the proxy. In most cases, that means the proxy is actually on the firewall machine. So you can do that. What he's talking about from Sonic Wall is basically filtering the websites you're going to go to by IP address. So he just wants to get this list of IP addresses of known bad websites and block them with the firewall. So PF, the firewall that pfSense uses, has this as an ability. You basically have these tables, and it's how most of the scripts that do things like block the people that are trying to brute force your SSH work. It basically, there's a text file with a list of IP addresses, and it gets loaded up into the firewall and reloaded automatically, and it blocks the stuff you want. So that's one way. He also talked a little bit about doing it in DNS. You can do some of that. You can block individual domains with that, and maybe that's helpful. Or use something like OpenDNS, but that's a little bit more work.
You could use something like pfSense's built-in DNS server for your local LAN DNS, and then forward out to OpenDNS for queries that your local DNS doesn't have.
Right, and then that blocks. If you set the right settings for OpenDNS, it'll block known malware and so on.
And I'm going to just mention, I've done that for dozens of clients back in the day, and it worked great, like really great.
And if you decide you want to block Facebook, you could add facebook.com or whatever as a local domain in your local DNS server and point it at localhost or something.
Yeah, and what I did there was exactly that, and then it would just redirect to an intranet page that stated the company's internet policy.
Yeah. So the problem with blocking based on just IP address, like you were talking about from the Sonic wall, is that many websites often share the same IP address as other ones. Like if for example, Krebs was behind the Akamai, or is now behind the Google Shield thing.
Yeah, great example.
So if you decide you want to block that website, you might block other websites that are also hosted on the same thing, and that wouldn't be good. Maybe that one's not a good example because nobody wants to block Krebs's website. But, like Cloudflare hosts a lot of sites, including some bad ones, but also some good ones. And if you just block all their IP addresses, then you're blocking both. I don't know. Some of my IP addresses host over 100 sites, and if you wanted to block one of them, blocking them based on the IP address would be
clunky. It'd be very clunky.
Yeah, and then the problem with trying to do it with something like Facebook is that they have hundreds and hundreds of IP addresses, and you're probably going to have trouble getting that right. So DNS can help there a little bit, but then, there are solutions around that where there are sites with a different domain name, and it basically proxies Facebook for you so that you can still load it. I know that.
Yeah, I mean,
people used to use that at school all the time.
Oh boy, that's a whack-a-mole game.
Facebook and the DNS.
That is a whack-a-mole game. That's not a winner.
Yeah. So there's the DNS-based solution works fairly well, but your other option is what's called a transparent proxy, where you're using Squid, but you don't have to configure the clients to use it. You basically force all the outbound connections to port 80 and 443 through Squid, and then the client doesn't even necessarily know they're going through a proxy.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think he kind of was in the mindset when I read that email that it's got to be one solution. And I think what you're saying and what I'm agreeing with is use everything. Use transparent proxy. Use DNS blocking and bring all of these things together to address this problem. And the problem with the WatchGuard solution you're using before is it's a blunt force tool. And so what you are kind of seeing as a disadvantage to pfSense in your email, because he's trying to convince management to switch to pfSense, what you are seeing as a disadvantage is just, I don't mean to be blunt, but it's kind of just a misunderstanding on your part. These are actually advantages because you can use a multi-tool approach. Transparent proxy is going to work great for your organization for blocking.
Right. No endpoint configuration required that way.
No endpoint configuration. It's integrated right into the pfSense box, so it's not like you have to do something complicated because the port 80 and 443 requests are already going that direction. You can build on top of that with content filtering, but just the caching and acceleration and bandwidth your company will save from that. These are advantages you're going to gain. Then you integrate in local DNS blocking for things you know you don't want. Create a list internally. It makes you actually have to think about it as a company. What is it we don't want our employees doing? You build a list, and then you set up an internal DNS server using pfSense and have it forward to OpenDNS, which you've pre-configured to block things like spyware and malware and porn, and he had a couple other things in there. You can do all of that using forwarding DNS, and you're set. And you can use what you're seeing as a disadvantage. You bring all of these together as a suite of tools. So
obviously it sounds like they're using Dell's Sonic Wall right now, and they are trying to get a checkmark to checkmark comparison, and it's not quite the same.
Yeah, and it's a little hard to know.
Part of it is because what Dell's selling you, here's a big blacklist of bad sites by IP address, is that doesn't work very well.
And it's a checkbox that you're checking, and it's a blunt tool that you don't really know what they're doing behind the scenes. And that's illustrated in his email. He's not quite clear how Watchdog pulls it off. And that I know that is nice. It solves a problem, but geez, I would be really uncomfortable not understanding how my endpoint device is actually working. Just think about it from that perspective as an oversight you'll have from a technical understanding of how your network is actually connecting from the user to the internet. When you're using that checkbox in the Watchdog device, you don't actually know what it's doing. It's probably all fine, but you couldn't actually do a diagram in Visio of how it's actually working. And that's not how you want to base your network. End of rant.
So the other things you brought up were HTTPS, and how that's basically encrypted, and so your proxy can't do anything about you can't look inside of it and tell if it's porn or not.
Yeah, he wanted to know if there's a way to like break that open or something.
You can force downgrading from HTTPS to HTTP in some cases, but any sites that have HSTS and so on will throw up a big scary warning. Now, if your goal is just to block the site, then that works for it. Other than the big scary warning your users get that they don't understand, rather than the regular blocking message or whatever. And he, in particular, since he doesn't control the endpoints, he can't enforce a root certificate to do the transparent intercept thing where you decrypt all the SSL traffic, run it through your proxy, and then have encryption between the proxy and the actual website. So I understand that's not an option, but in general, you just have to decide what you want to block and block it. While the Sonic Wall feature sounds more advanced, it really isn't. It's just a list of IP addresses and it's blocking it. And you can do that in pfSense in at least 3 different ways. The simplest just being a single firewall rule that says block every IP address from this table. And then that table is just the downloaded list of IP addresses from whatever thing you've decided you want to block. Mm-hmm. But, like we talked about the other week, it probably doesn't make sense to block entire countries or big blocks of IP addresses just because there's some porn in it. In the end, I don't know that you can actually solve the problem that easily.
All right.
If content filtering was easy, we wouldn't have this whole industry based on, look at the UK tried to mandate it, and look how well that worked.
Mm-hmm. All right, Tyler rounds out the email with a question about NFS versus Samba. Hey, Chris and Alan, quick question. And I don't recall if you've covered this before, but I'm wondering if you could tell me the quick pros and cons of using NFS versus Samba for network shares. I have a FreeNAS box as my main network file and media storage, and several other Linuxes, Macs, and Raspberry Pis, which all talk to the FreeNAS server. He's also has some Windows devices, but I'll demand it. He'll talk about those later. I'm using Raspberry Pis with OSMC for streaming media from the FreeNAS via Kodi, and my Linux boxes and Macs stream a bit of media, but are mostly just sharing files, rsyncing, etc. I'm currently using Samba for network shares, but I'm wondering if there are any advantages to switching to NFS instead. Thanks for all the great work you do. Love all the shows on GB and TechSNAP in particular. All the best. TD.
There's not all that much the protocols are very different, but in the end, either way, you're sharing the files back and forth. The authentication models are a little bit different, but in your homeland, you're usually using a simple one either way, so it doesn't make that big of a difference. Samba has the advantage of also working with Windows, which is, kind of makes you lean towards it either way. But, both of them work, and both of them are not going to be speed limited on your internal gigabit LAN. Yeah. So there's no particular reason to worry about one versus the other.
I have a lazy rule of thumb, and it goes like this: if it's a share I'm going to access on demand, it should be Samba. If it's a share that I want to persistently have connected, and it's almost more like it's part of my file system, like it's another storage device on my computer, then I go NFS. So for my Plex boxes and my SAB NZB systems, all those, whatever, anything that's a persistent front-end box is connected to a whole bunch of storage, or my Proxmox system, I absolutely go NFS. And I find NFS to be slightly faster. But that's, in this case, that's when I'm editing etcfs tab. I'm adding these mount points so they mount when the system boots up. They're like part of the file system. When it's something I connect to arbitrarily to transfer a file from time to time or access some documents, I use Samba. And I think that's where I draw the line. And
the FreeNAS can run both, and you can literally, use both from all your systems. NFS on Windows is really, really crazy. But,
that would be the other thing. If I'm going to use Macs or Windows, I would probably lean towards Samba. And
so Macs have NFS and everything, although apparently in the current CR betas, accessing NFS will crash it very quickly.
Yeah, and also it doesn't show up quite the same way. It's like it's on the file system, but it's in part of the file system that's hidden to like the regular Mac UI. Whereas if you connect to Samba, it shows up as a volume in the Finder, in open and save dialog boxes. It's just more integrated into Mac OS. But again, if you want to use NFS because it's something that's going to be persistent, then you just build shortcuts around that.
There are a couple of advantages to NFS if you're using fancy file system features, but in general, with your FreeNAS, you're probably not. Both of them support ACLs, so you can have advanced permissions. So there's really no particular pro or con to either one for your use case.
Funny enough, you could also mount a Samba share using FS tab like I do, and one thing to keep in mind when it's Samba talking to Samba, you get great performance. It's not like it's using some weird Windows-only code that goes slower and has a bunch of overhead. Samba's actually made an amazing improvement so that the Samba server and the Samba client, once they realize they're talking to each other, you get great benefits there. So you're not even really disadvantaged.
I'm having no performance issues running my entire computer over Samba from Windows here.
Yeah. So I
copy these files around at max out the gigabit the whole time.
I'll give you. Here's how Angela's.
When I play games off Steam directly off the Samba share, and it works.
You do, yeah.
It's faster than if I had a regular spinning hard drive in my computer because the latency is lower. Because ZFS is pre-fetching, and I'm using 6 hard drives instead of 1.
Yeah,
basically.
So at Angela's house right now, she has an Intel NUC that has a bunch of front-end services on it and like a tiny SSD physically installed into it. And then over the NUC's built-in Ethernet, we have essentially all of the data in the world available to it because I have her currently mounted with an NFS share of data, and in the future we'll probably add another array and she'll do another NFS mount. It'll be totally transparent to her. It'll be perfect, and that's where NFS is really solid. But when she connects to that system from her desktop, she uses Samba because it's more on demand. So there you go, Tyler. I hope that's maybe a good line to draw and hope it answers your question. If you'd like to send us a question, go to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click the contact link, and then choose TechSNAP from the dropdown and ask it, or you could email us directly. Which I don't think a single person did this week. Everybody pretty much used the contact form, but you actually can. TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com, and we'll feature it in an upcoming episode, and of course the subreddit as well. But now with the feedback all done, it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the roundup of stories that didn't fit at the top of the show, but we still want to go over and give you some links to follow up on your own. And some of these links came from our subreddit over at techsnap.reddit.com. Go check it out if you'd like to submit content to this show. And Alan, our first one actually didn't come in from the subreddit. It came in via email, and it's a follow-up to the accessibility abuse, you might want to say, from Dropbox that we covered last week. Well, it looks like it's starting to change. Dropbox has acknowledged that this is a big problem. They say they're now working with Apple to make it better, and they plan not to abuse it at the present.
Yes, and apparently macOS Sierra will address this by not allowing programs to do that.
Well, isn't that out? Yeah, it's out publicly released today.
Beta.
No, I think it's out.
Oh?
Yeah,
okay.
it was released, yes.
I know the previous 2 betas were crashing constantly if you tried to use NFS.
Yeah, no, it is out. It is, yes, and I think that might still be an issue because we got an email in about that still being a problem. So, now this is a good one. Oh, you did see this, how to crash systemd in one tweet.
Yes. So basically, if you run systemd-notify with a parameter of just quote, so basically empty but not, so an empty string rather than no parameter, and pointed at the run systemd notify socket, it can cause PID1 to hang or crash, and to the point where the system feels generally unusable. Trying to SSH or SU will hang for up to 30 seconds because systemd is now integrated in the login system. You have to wait for the attempted contact systemd to time out after 30 seconds before it'll go ahead, and so on. And it sounds pretty nasty.
Now, it doesn't work on some systems, I guess?
His follow-up says that some people can only reproduce this if they do this command in a while true loop and do it like really a whole bunch of times really fast.
Wow, yeah, sure.
Because it seems, depending on the version, I think systemd restarts itself when it hangs or crashes and is eventually becoming responsive again. But if you do it constantly, it will basically be dead. And apparently the bug was introduced over 2 years ago in systemd 209.
Hello, Leonard. Hello. This one struck a chord with me, how the Seattle police, that's right, my local police, secretly and illegally purchased a tool for tracking your social media posts. So this is kind of interesting, including dollar amounts. The tracking software, which the SPD purchased in October of 2014 from a CIA-funded company called Geofedia, is designed to tell officers where you posted from and what you said. It can also show hundreds of other tweets, Instagrams, and other social media posts from anywhere else in the vicinity, and then file all of that information in one big old database. The secret purchase of Geofedia software for $14,125 violated a Seattle law requiring a city official outside the police department to be notified of such acquisitions. Oh, that's how they got caught. So an SPD spokesperson, which was was talking to the stranger, admitted on September 23rd that the Geopedia purchase should have been cleared and should have been done in accordance with the Seattle code. He offered no excuse, but added that we're going to stop using that. And 3 days later, they said they'd stopped using the Geofedia. That's kind of a creepy, just watching that. I guess maybe it might be useful for protests.
You can tell Twitter not to record your location. I don't know if that actually stops them from doing it, but...
That's a good point. I don't know either. All right, our next link in the roundup is a video. What we got here? Oh, it's a Tesla video.
Yep.
So this is remote hacking a Tesla.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
I want to fast forward a little bit.
All right, I'll jump
actually
in.
doing
I was gonna do like a voiceover. I was all ready to be like a Mike Rowe here. So they jump ahead. All right.
Yes. So there's the hacker sitting in the back of a different car across the parking lot.
Yep.
And this guy's sitting in his Tesla.
Yep.
And then stuff is going to start happening.
So the seats are moving right now. Nobody's in the car at this moment.
Yes. So the seat starts moving, the sunroof opening, and so on. They're basically remotely controlling the car.
It seems like specifically with the Tesla, anything would be possible. Even adjusting the suspension remotely would be possible with a Tesla. And they changed the boot logo on the in computer car screen there.
Now, if you forward to a little bit further, you can see them driving down the parking lot in the car. And he tells the guy in the remote office, not a ways away, to hit the brakes. And he presses some computer buttons, and then
that's pretty creepy. And then here he's
folding up the wing mirrors while they're driving along.
Yeah. Okay. See, the thing about the Tesla is all of this is computer controlled. There's not a single thing in the car that's not computer controlled.
But why is it remotely accessible? I think.
Yeah. Well.
They ended up. They used the in-car computer to go to a website and infected it or something. I think. But either way, it really is a bad plan.
Yeah.
But yeah. There's. It's worth watching the whole video. At one point, they're driving across the parking lot, and they say, "Okay, now," over the cell phone. And somebody at a place miles away presses the button on the computer, and the car goes stop, just like slams on the brakes, and you can see them all going, trying not to smack their face on the windshield, kind of thing.
All right, so for those of you that had the end of September on the bingo card for when a Pokemon Go scam would actually take off, go ahead and check it off, because here you go. A Pokemon Go guide infected thousands of phones. Yeah, that's right. Recently, and that's not a lot, it's at least 6,000 phones, which is a drop in the bucket, were infected by a Trojan disguised as a Pokemon Go guide. Now, this is why I decided to talk about it, because the number itself, that's not super remarkable, 6,000. But here's some cleverness that it does that I think will probably take off big long term. This, by the way, is coming from a study by Kaspersky. But so here's the funny thing. The app, or I guess malware, doesn't start as soon as the victim launches the app. Instead, it waits for the user to install or uninstall another app, and then uses that action to determine whether it's on a real Android device or in a virtual machine, obviously like a researcher's virtual machine. If the device is actually a phone, the malware will then wait for a period of time, a couple of hours, for example, before communicating with a server and then only proceeding to wreak havoc after getting remote instructions.
Yep. Because I remember researchers from a university found that Apple's system only runs an app for like 40 seconds.
So a couple of hours? That's
yeah. So just wait for other interactions that aren't going to happen in the isolated test environment, and then just sleep for a while and then do it, and much lower chance of getting caught.
That's pretty clever. Waiting for another app to be installed and uninstalled. That is.
Yep.
All right, I'm ready for it. My body is ready. My mind is ready, and my building is not so ready for 5 gigabits over.
Actually,
maybe
that's what this is about.
Holy smokes!
The new 802.3 BZ allows your existing Cat5e Ethernet cables that are already inside your walls to support 2.5 gigahertz. Gigabits per second.
All right.
And your existing Cat6 cables to do up to 5 gigabits per second.
So my body and my building are ready.
Yeah. If you already have got
5E
so
or
if you already
6?
have 5E in your building, then your previous limit was 1, and you can now go up to 2.5 gigabytes without having to change the cabling.
That's great.
You would still need new NICs and new switches, but the advantage of not having to rewire inside the walls could make this a huge advantage.
Huge.
Now, and then Cat6, which Cat6 can do 10 gigabits, but only over half the regular length. And you need a Cat6A to be able to go the full 100 meters. But with this, your Cat6 cabling can do 5 gigabits per second, which, over the full length. So it's like, well, you could do 10 gigabit if your cable run isn't that long. But either way, that's an interesting thing. The only other time I'd seen 2.5 gigabits used was actually Intel was using it for some internal stuff where they had a cluster type machine and had a whole bunch of smaller machines in it, and they would all interface at 2.5 or 5 gigabits to the backplane, and then actually out to your network, you'd have like a 40 gigabit NIC, which is an existing standard. But this is interesting in that it'll allow you to upgrade existing stuff in place. I already have Cat6A already wired in my house because I decided to do that when I bought the house. But for a lot of things, could be pretty cool.
So the register reminds us that metadata is a thing. So iMessage on your iOS device might be end-to-end encrypted, but that metadata, well, Apple's got it, and they do share it with law enforcement. So they got their hands on the sheet that Apple provides to law enforcement. This is a fascinating read. Even if you're not an Apple user, it's a really good read. What it basically is a sheet that they give out to law enforcement that explains something like the way you would explain it to a clueless parent, as The Intercept actually puts it. There's questions that include, how does it work? Does iMessage use cellular data plans? And then there's the final section. What will I get if I serve Apple with a pen register or tap and trace court order for an iMessage account? And this is where we get what Apple does have on iMessages, which this is new information. They have, and I think something that people don't realize is they don't have the contents of your message. But when you start a new text message on an iOS device and you type in an email address or a phone number of somebody that you want to text, in the background, the iMessage application connects to Apple servers, providing your IP address, the time you connected, and the number you just typed in the field to look up to see if they're on the existing iMessage network or if they need to be shunted over to SMS. And that query is logged by Apple. Simply putting the phone number in iMessage that you want to text, not the contents of the text message, but the query to see if they're in the iMessage system. That lookup, which happens automatically once you complete the field, that's logged and available to law enforcement. Now, Apple does specifically point out in their message to law enforcement that this doesn't mean you ever sent that person a message. It doesn't mean you ever received any messages. It just simply means you typed their contact information into the field. That's the only thing it proves. But it kind of does go against some of the things Apple previously said, where they claimed they didn't store any records that didn't include your location. However, it's clear in this, they are at least storing your IP address that you connect from, which in some cases could identify your location. Mm-hmm. Interesting write-up by The Intercept, and much more in there and worth your time if you care about those kinds of things. Link in the roundup. So hey, it wouldn't be a complete full-fledged roundup, like a Thanksgiving dinner of roundups, without a little Krebs on security.
That's we didn't cover his foot.
I know, right?
But he's also during all this break, he's still doing his regular work, and he's got a story here about new Money Mules scam. So this one's a lady from Canada got a job offer that paid her like $800 a week and 5% commission, and she would get wired money, and told to go into the branch of the bank, withdraw the cash, then take it to a Bitcoin ATM and deposit it to a Bitcoin address you've been sent as a QR code. And eventually figured out that this was suspicious. And got in touch with Krebs about it. But it seems that the mules are switching to Bitcoin rather than the regular way of doing it, probably because it reduces the number of steps. Normally, basically, they'd have a mule at the country where they were getting the money, sending it to a mule in their country, which eventually would get it to them. And by putting Bitcoin in there, they've reduced their chance of getting caught because they don't have any contact with anyone locally. Although Krebs also goes on to note that the way they're often doing this is actually hacking companies' accounts on job sites like Monster.com, and then going through all the resumes that have been submitted to that company, and going after people who are desperately looking for work and are willing to take these too good to be true sounding jobs where you're actually a money mule. And Krebs also points out that be careful because as the mule you're kind of like, well, I'm getting paid and whatever. What's the downside for me? I can claim I was just a dope or whatever. It's like often banks will expect you to pay them back the money that actually got clawed back. So be careful with that.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, Alan, I know you're a Firefox user, and I wanted to include this one for all the others out there as well. It looks like there could be an issue with Firefox where there's some pretty... Hello, doggy. Hello. Hi there. Hello, puppy. There's some really aggressive writes by Firefox to SSDs, including like a 12 gigabyte write in one day. And a lot of it is the SQLite database for the recovery of your session if Firefox were to crash. And so there's some ways you can improve it and tweak in your Firefox config to turn that down. But he was shocked when he looked into it.
Yeah, depending on the SSD you have, that's significant wear to your SSD. That's like 0.1 drive writes per day if you're doing 12 gigabytes on 120 gigabyte SSD. And if you don't have, an Intel data center class SSD that can handle like 8 drive writes a day, that can, over the course of a couple of years, that can wear out your SSD. Yeah.
So check it out if you're a Firefox user. We have a link in the roundup. This was specifically tested on Windows, but I would think it might apply to the Linux or Mac versions as well.
It's mostly the same code everywhere.
Exactly.
My session directory is actually on my Samba share.
So let's see. Do you think then that in your case that could be constantly saturating your network connection?
Definitely not saturating. Right?
I guess not saturating, but constantly writing to over your network connection. I guess it's not.
Sure, but
yeah. I think it's probably not it's not enough overhead to actually even be noticeable, probably.
Yeah, my network connection is, not doing anything.
Okay, so you have a link here to a comprehensive Super Mario Brothers disassembly. I love it already.
So they've actually got the complete source code, not the complete source code, but a complete source code to Super Mario Brothers for the NES. With lots of comments. Those are just defines, but if you get down a little bit further, they actually have actual comments.
I don't want to make people's motion sick, so I'm over here. I'm smacking my space bar. You hear that as I scroll down? There we go.
The page down works better, but
yeah, that's true.
But it's quite extensively commented, and if you have some understanding of assembly and want to learn a bit more, go ahead.
Cool, nice find, Alan. Very nice. I just wanted to give a heads up to those of you out there that are still running CentOS 5 boxes. You got 6 months as of today's episode of the TechSNAP program. Literally, as of today, as we record this episode of TechSNAP, there are 6 months left for CentOS 5, and then it hits end of life. So maybe start planning your migration.
Yeah, they're already on 7. You should probably get going.
But you know what? I know we have people out there running CentOS 5. I know it.
We got rid of our last 6 recently.
Oh, really? Good for you. Good for you. All right.
Well, we don't like 7 at all, but
what are you going to do?
Let's keep 6 alive forever and not have System D. That'd be great.
Hashtag never System D. Hashtag never System D. Most people never actually tried to restore from backups. This is from Gary Bernhard on Twitter. Here's a story of what happens when you actually verify your backups work. I select a snapshot in Time Machine. It shows an empty directory. I know the files will show up after about 30 seconds. You just kind of have to know this. I select a couple of folders and tell it to restore them to my test restore directory. Then I get an error message. The files can't be copied because there's a problem with the file. It doesn't say what file is causing the problem. It doesn't say what the problem is. And there's exactly 4 Google results for this message. And he goes on to say just like the shit train that he has to live through to restore files.
Yeah, he found a GitHub thread where someone reboots and it fixes the problem. So he tried that. He opens up the UI and now it loads his home directory, but only shows 4 folders of the 40 it was showing before. Then he chooses a different snapshot and then go back to the same snapshot and suddenly there's all the folders. Try to restore the same 2 folders as before with the same restore target as before. Once again, you get the message, this file can't be copied because there's a problem with the file. I now assume that Time Machine has corrupted itself, but it's apparently doesn't know this. The backups are just sitting there silently corrupted.
I like this as this kind of send off. In summary, you're going to have to try very, very hard to avoid losing all of your data. Computers don't actually work. Happy Tuesday. Nailed it. Exactly right. Yeah. Oh, man. Verify your backups, people. Jeez, that's the worst thing about them, too. Now, I got to feel bad for our friends over in Russia. Apparently, Russia has banned Pornhub, YouPorn, and tells citizens instead to just go out and meet someone in real life. Aren't they having like a population growth problem, too? Maybe there's more to this than we realize.
Yeah, like they had a holiday recently where it was like have a baby day, basically. It's like everybody gets the day off work because we really want you to have more babies.
You know what? Maybe it's a better time than ever to go to Russia. But yeah, so apparently they're blocking about it. And when they asked about it, the official replied, just go out and meet someone in real life. I guess that was like a regulator or something that said that. That's a hilarious response. If you'd like to submit something to our roundup, go over to techsnap.reddit.com. Don't forget we do this show live on Thursdays over at jblive.tv. You can find the local time at jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. It's about it's not about. I guess I'll say this. We usually start about 15 minutes early or so, but we start at 1 p.m. roughly Pacific.
Yep.
And
which is 2000 UTC.
Boom. There you go. We also would love to get your emails. You got the contact form where you can find the contact page and send it in. And last but not least, we do a TechSNAP episode, at least so far, for 286 weeks in a row without missing a single episode. And you can get them all automatically by subscribing to any of the RSS feeds you'd like, video or audio, whatever works best for you. And last but not least, if you're a patron, don't forget we do post whenever we can the live complete streams of TechSNAP, which include all of the between segment shenanigans, pre-show stuff, me screwing up the intro, and all of that stuff, which is available for our patrons at patreon.com/today, at least until we come up with a new name. All right, thanks so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.